Hey, dear listeners, I thought I would answer some patron emails. This email is from annual highest tier patron Jocelyn G. Good old Jocelyn. She says, Dr. Ann Blake's talk on projection was really thought-provoking. I'm keen to learn more about projection and other related concepts on the podcast. Just chiming in here. Yeah. Dr. Ann Blake, my friend, a lot of people really loved her episodes, and I want to have her back on the podcast at some point. All right, so you ask a question, Jocelyn. Is projective identification the same as projection? The answer is no, they're not the same. They're related. In a nutshell, projection is defined as an unwanted aspect of self that you project onto someone else. So projecting, if it's not projective identification, if it's just projection, it can be entirely internal or it can motivate behavior. So for example, let's say that you're not a good listener and you know that you're not a good listener, and you're probably not a good listener because of what you went through growing up, but you unconsciously know that you're not a good listener. But your ego denies this painful aspect of yourself because it's painful to acknowledge that you're not a good listener. It means you're not perfect, you're not a good person. You might even go so far as to say that you're an evil person or you're not a worthy person because you're not, because the self can be pretty harsh on oneself. And so you have to deal with this somehow, and a very effective way to deal with stuff like this internally in the psyche is to just deny it. What are you talking about? I'm a great listener. And then what do you do with that, though? Well, one of the defenses to deal with this psychodynamic, this dynamic force within the psyche that is pushing against each other, is to project it on to other people. The way that we project it on other people is to distort other people or to find others that naturally fit with this projection. So we'll either find people that are not good at listening and then latch onto them in a way that we wouldn't normally, prefer them as friends or colleagues or partners when we wouldn't normally, and then see them as being even more of a bad listener than they actually are. But more often than not, projection is done on someone that doesn't deserve it at all or doesn't deserve it very much. So we do that through distorting. We will deny our aspect of self by distorting what other people are doing. We will choose to interpret, we'll cherry pick, we'll color everything that's happening, or we'll create situations in which they can't really be a good listener, and we will internally, but this isn't just an internal process. Another example is that you're thinking about cheating. You have an urge to cheat, but you don't like that about yourself, and you are busted up about it. You have a psychodynamic about that issue. There's a force that's like, you got to get out there and cheat. You got to cheat. And another part of yourself is like, no, I'm not a cheater. That's not okay. Being a cheater is a bad thing. That makes me a bad person. So this causes internal tension and will require the need of some sort of defense. Well, projection comes to the fore and says, I'll take care of this. And so I'm going to project this onto others. And then you find yourself accusing other people of cheating, maybe your partner, when it's you that wants to cheat or is cheating. So projective identification is projection plus other things. So basically, it's a more effective version of projection, or it's a more ongoing version of projection. So you have an aspect of self that you consider to be painful, and you need to get rid of it. You need to deny it. And it's an aspect of the self that causes a lot of internal strife. And so you project it onto someone by distorting perceptions. You might also find someone that matches with that. But here's the projective identification part. You manipulate or socialize the object that you're projecting onto to behave in line with the projection, to identify with the projection. You're getting someone to feel the way that you feel. You're getting them to be the aspect that you are, but you hate about yourself. So, for example, you're not a good listener. You deny that painful aspect of self. You project it by distorting perceptions of another person. You find someone who is either a bad listener or can be easily manipulated to look like a bad listener. You subconsciously create situations in which the object is a bad listener. You distort and you amplify that perception. You feel very unheard, no surprise, and you accuse the object of being a bad person, as being a bad listener. And the individual will feel like they don't want to listen. They will find themselves, not listening to you or changing the subject or being annoyed with you as you are talking. A really good way to do this to someone is to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, right? Over time, someone will not want to listen to you anymore because you're not listening to them, right? So this is a classic projective identification in that you're both denying the aspect of self by projecting it, but you're also doing the aspect of self. So if I were to do this and I were to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, but unconsciously what I'm trying to do is provoke the other person to be easily perceived by me as being a bad listener, even though naturally they're not really like that or they're not as bad as that, then I will talk and talk and talk and talk because I'm in my head consciously I'm thinking, well, I deserve to talk because no one is a good listener to me, and this person never listens to me. So I'm going to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and then the object, this other person, is going to get annoyed because they're not being heard. And so that's the other thing, is that the other person will both feel unheard and they will act in a way of unhearing you. So everyone is feeling everything. That's what projective identification does. And so the other person feels unheard because you're over talking, but you feel unheard, and that's why you're over talking. Then the other person starts to get bored or annoyed and they stop listening. They might even get hostile. And then that's when you say, see, you never listen to me. And you get to be a bad listener and project the bad listening and react to external bad listening when in reality it's you yourself that knows you're a bad listener. Another example, if we look at the cheating thing, so you're thinking about cheating, you have an urge to do that, and you deny that painful aspect of yourself because it's hard to admit to oneself that you have that urge. So you deal with it by projecting it, and you project it by distorting perceptions of another person. And so you either find someone who is likely to cheat on you, or you find someone who is easily pushed to cheat, or you find someone who is easy to distort as cheating, like someone who works too much or has friends of the gender that you are, Okay, so there you are in a relationship with someone that is either likely to cheat because that's their pattern, or they're easily pushed to cheat, or they're easily distorted as cheating. And you yourself, in an unconscious way, because you got to get rid of this aspect of yourself and you got to get the other person to be that bad aspect of yourself. So how do you socialize another person to cheat or look like they're cheating? Well, you have to create distance. And so you start to get angry at the person, or you start to be distant, or you start to be frustrating in a sexual way with your partner, and your partner starts to drift away. And the partner might actually eventually start cheating because that's their tendency anyway, because you might have actually met this partner because they were cheating on their partner with you, right? Or you just kind of know that they're that way, or they are just someone who looks like they're cheating a lot. Maybe they're better looking than you think that you are, and therefore you're like, oh, they're always wanting to leave me or something. And you create distance from them, and then that individual either starts cheating or spends more time away from you, so it looks like they're cheating, and then you accuse your partner of cheating, and then you start to cheat because you're only cheating because your partner cheated on you first, and so you're able to enact your urge of being a cheater, but you're only doing it because the other person was cheating, but the person is only cheating in your eyes because you push them to do that, and they might not even be cheating, and you're still cheating. This is all making sense? This is projective identification. All right, so the next question that you have is, how do we know when I'm seeing things authentically as they are without projection? That's your question, Jocelyn. How do we know that we're distorting or not, is the question. And the answer is, there's no way to know. We never know. That's the humility of human perception. We just can't know. The way to be more confident is to go to a shit ton of therapy and work our way backwards. So the way to, and I do this with my students, this is kind of key to countertransference awareness and management, because projective identification will absolutely happen in the therapy office, and both client and therapist will use projective identification on the other person. So for all of us, the key to understanding our likely blind spots and our likely distortions, because we're always distorting to some extent, particularly under stress and particularly in close attachments that we're worried about, is to work our way backwards or to work our way forwards. I know that sounds like unhelpful, but to work our way forwards is to look at, and this is what I do with my students, is that I say, analyze your grandparents the way that they were with your parents, then analyze your parents the way that they were as adults and the way that they were with you when you were a child. And then we can start to have light shed on what your likely issues are today, including your projective identification. So for example, if and some of you don't know any information along these lines, but if you do, you might know that, let's say that you know that your dad was being criticized a lot by his mom, and then you notice that your dad is critical with you when you were growing up, or was the opposite, was like too hands off with you or something, didn't give you any feedback or something. And then you look at your early childhood and the way you were being treated, for better, for worse. And then you say to yourself, well, I know that as a child, I felt overly criticized, for example. Well, then we start working our way forward and we start asking questions about, and we wonder if you internalized or interjected that relationship of being criticized. And when we ask that question, so if you know, then you know, like maybe you already have explored this, but if you don't know, then this is the beginning of that exploration of just like, well, I don't think that I'm a critical person. That's not how I see myself consciously. But if I look back to my childhood, I was criticized a lot and I didn't like it. So I'm either not critical just for some reason, either I just didn't identify with that, or it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, or I've been through enough therapy or something, or I am very critical, but I'm denying it and I'm distorting it and I'm framing it as something else, like, well, I'm blunt, or I'm direct, or I'm a truth sayer, or I'm logical, or something like this. There's a lot of excuses for being critical of others. And that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to work our way backwards in terms of asking people how we make them feel. And independent of whether or not we think that's rational or not, but when we ask enough people around us how we make them feel, then we can imagine what is really going on for us. For example, if a bunch of people close to you would say that you make them feel small, then in all likelihood, you are in denial of your own smallness. You think of yourself as small. And so your way of coping with that is to distort it. You hate the fact that you're small, that you're insignificant, or you're stupid, or you're frivolous, or something. And you can't stand that about yourself. It's a lot of pain. And so you, through projective identification, will find people that are either prone to that or are susceptible to your socializing manipulations. And so you make the other person feel small, but you don't know that you're making you're not conscious of the fact that you're making the other person feel small. The other person does feel small chronically, and they might even tell you that they feel small, but then in their action of telling you that you feel small, you in turn start to feel small. and then you need to defend more, and so you need the other person to feel small, and the cycle continues until the relationship breaks up, and then you find someone else that's susceptible to that, and the cycle starts all over again. The other person brings their own projective identifications to the table, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so how do we work on this? Well, listen to my episodes on projective identification and also on corrective experiences and family of origin work, and also, differentiation and corrective experiences in therapy. Therapy arguably is one big projective identification exercise on behalf of the client. The client is, another way of thinking about projective identification in my mind is that it's a reenactment. So we have a father in this example I was giving earlier that's criticizing you, and then you internalize that relationship of critical other and criticized self. And through projective identification, you recreate that relationship. You recreate that dyad in which you are your father and you're making someone else feel like you. Meanwhile, you consciously think you're the you in that dyad and your partner is your dad. But in reality, you are your dad and you're making your partner feel like you. This is projective identification. It's a reenactment. So the client will recreate their dyads with the therapist and make the therapist feel and have urges along those lines. So if we just go with the criticals thing, so the client comes in and starts to socialize me to have urges to criticize. I'll interpret it through my therapist framework, and I will develop clinical justifications for enacting this criticism of my client, but I'm just unconsciously going along with it. I'm being manipulated into it, which is going to happen. But what do I do with it? Do I raise awareness around this? Do I have a lot of practice knowing what this feels like and how I can manage it? Or do I have no awareness of psychodynamic theory and I just get pushed around and I end up criticizing the client, and then the client blows out of therapy and never comes back? That happens all the fucking time. So there's a lot of variance there on regarding what the therapist is aware of and what they're trained to do. And if the therapist knows what's happening and refrains from recreating that dynamic and being critical while staying in close contact with the client, this is a corrective experience. This is one of the core definitions of a corrective experience, that as the client is subconsciously, unconsciously trying to force the therapist to comply with a past relationship enactment, the therapist notices it and works very hard to resist the urge to go along with those urges. Because, the manipulation from the client can be really elaborate. The client can be saying, like in today's milieu, you could have a client who is trying to recreate this criticism dynamic and will adopt right-wing talking points, or will drop in a racist notion or something, or will follow the wrong sort of podcaster. And the client knows, at least unconsciously, that in all likelihood the therapist does not adhere to that political point of view, and the therapist will fall right into it and will actually start criticizing the client. And then they've recreated the situation, and the projective identification is complete, and the denial of that aspect, because the client is distracted, is another word to put to projective identification, or a lot of defenses, is that the client doesn't have the space to even know that they're the one that's being critical, because the criticism is so loudly coming from the outside, but they were the one that pushed someone or found someone that would be likely to do that. Anyway, so in therapy, when therapists are aware of this and work against it more times than not, what it does is it creates a new interject, and it diminishes the power. This is my language. It diminishes the power of the original interject. So I have a client that is trying to get me to criticize them, and they're doing everything in their power, subconsciously and unconsciously, to provoke me to do that. They get to know me well enough and my preferences and my little quirks as a therapist to know what buttons to press in me, and I'll feel the urge, and I will occasionally slip and do it, but if I'm aware of it most of the time, then I'm like, okay, how do I? So the other part of the equation is that you're not just distancing as a therapist, because it'd be easy to do that, right? You just say like, well, I don't care about this client, or I'm just going to check out, or I'm just going to daydream, or I'm just going to not really care about what's going on here. I can tell they're trying to provoke me to criticize them, but I don't really care enough about this situation to be motivated to do anything. I'll just sit here at a distance and nod my head and say, tell me more. Well, that doesn't really help, because the client knows that you're distancing and the relationship isn't strong enough to actually be a corrective experience. It's not deep enough or meaningful enough to either one of the individuals to be internalized as a fixed feature of one's personality. Our personality, one could argue, at least in large part, is comprised of internalized intense relationships. And if we're going to change the personality, we have to internalize new intense relationships, i.e. therapy. So as the therapist resists that urge, then not only do they have to do their best to not fall prey to the projective, agree or comply with the projective identification, but they also have to stay close, attached, involved, intertwined, which means that you still care, the client knows you care, you're still affected. You have to be close enough so that it's clear. One of the indicators of closeness is that you're affected by someone. They can bother you. And so as a therapist, if you're going to do this style of therapy, you have to be close. And that means that you're going to be affected, and you're going to have behavioral indications that you are being bothered by maybe what the client is doing, or it's frustrating you somehow, or you're concerned, and it's visceral. It's not just verbal. It's not just a game that you play. It's real. And this is why being a therapist is hard. And it's not for everybody, or at least a real therapist, as I define it. I mean, you can be a technical therapist and just do the manual, but that to me is, you're just a facilitator. You're not a real therapist in my mind. I mean, God bless, we need all types of professionals, but I think you know what I mean. Anyway, so that's what a corrective experience is, and what it does is, each time this happens in the client's psyche, the original internalized construct, the original dyad that's been internalized from their past, gets frustrated, and eventually it gives up. It stops having power because it's trying to recreate it. It's not being recreated, and it loses its life. It begins to fade. It never goes away completely, but it loses its power within the psyche, and this new interject is being bolstered, one of safety and non-criticism and attachment. And in the face of the client actually being criticizable, there's a person who is close and who has unconditional positive regard or unconditional love, and the client feels it and internalizes it, believes it, trusts it, so that they don't need projective identification anymore. They don't need to push others to be critical of them. They don't need to be critical of others, because they have a new interject that they deserved in the beginning. Going on with the email. But let's take a break first. All right, back from the break. Let's do an OPP before we go on with the email. These people became annual middle tier patrons in the first half of 2022. We have Mo from Stuttgart, Germany. Am I pronouncing that right? Stuttgart. We have Noamine from the UK, from Luton, I'm guessing, UK. Noamime? I don't know. Leslie from Phoenix, Arizona. Angela from Escondido, California. Chris from Woodstock, Georgia. Eliza from Milwaukee, Oregon. We have Woodstock, Georgia, and Milwaukee. Yeah, if you don't know, Woodstock, the famous one, is in New York, right? And then you have Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is famous for Laverne and Shirley, of course, and all the other things. And then you have Milwaukee, Oregon. And then Indigo Love from Pleasanton, California. Lehu, Portland from Portland, Oregon. I'm pretty sure are you the same Lehu that we've been communicating with sometimes? And we have Zoya and Eliska and Amy from God knows where. Thank you for becoming a patron and staying a patron all of this time. And also thank you for being an annual patron. And also thank you for being a middle tier patron. All right, going on with your email, Jocelyn, you say, I know we aren't supposed to think of projection as a bad thing, but I'm scared to think that we commonly engage with people and things not as they are, but as we need or want to see them. Just chiming in. Have I said that we're not supposed to see projection as a bad thing? I mean, it's not a good thing. I don't know if I would say it's like a bad thing. I don't know what you mean by bad. We all do projection and projective identification, so it shouldn't be stigmatized. It's not an odd thing. It's not evil. It's not volitional, but it doesn't help. Projection and projective identification. I mean, there's a version of extending this concept, which I engage in sometimes, particularly when I'm teaching it to students, that projective identification can be functional in that you can actually, like, I'll just go down this road for a second, but one of the ways that you can look at physical intimacy of a certain sort with your spouse, like kissing and cuddling, is that you internalized your attachment and safety and physical needs when you were an infant, as you were suckling and you were in skin-to-skin, close face contact with your parent, your caregiver. You internalized all of that, and when you need it as an adult, then you recreate it by suckling. And so we mutually suckle each other in the face. Sometimes we literally suckle nipples, for in overt and non-overt ways. But at the very least, the suckling motion, and I apologize for somebody that might be squeamish about tongue stuff or something, but what we call French kissing, or what I learned from a commenter on Love is Blind, because I was like, what do you call it in France? And they said that the phrase in France has something to do with shoveling, that you shovel. It's like you're tongue shoveling. Like that's the common way of referring to French kissing. And so with French kissing, and I'd love to know the history of that. It's just like, should we do the French style kissing tonight, honey? Yeah, let's do French style. What about the Dutch style? Oh, I don't know about the Dutch. Well, then there's the Dutch oven, Why did the Dutch always get thrown under the bus? Anyway, so you have the suckling of each other's faces. I don't know. I mean, who knows? I don't want to just be like, I'm on the Joe Rogan podcast and I'm just like, you got to think about it, man. I mean, just think about it. It's obvious. It's because there's no way to know anything, but and I'm not the first person to say this, but one could argue that we are recreating the elements of our early internalized, hopefully internalized repetitively, relationship dyad that involved safety and love and closeness and security and togetherness, and we will have our way of creating intimacy with our partner that is kind of specific to that. For some people, they might have grown up with a lot of cuddling, and therefore that's what they desire. Another person might have grown up with a lot of feeding involved, and so they eat when they want to bond. It's just and those are good things. I mean, they can have bad aspects, but I'm highlighting anyway. Going on. Let's see. I know we aren't supposed to think of projection as a bad thing. I don't know where you're getting that, Jocelyn. Does someone say that? Did I say that? And then you say, I'm scared to think that we commonly engage with people and things not as they are. Just chiming in. Yeah, that projection is horrible in that way. We're reacting to an internal projection onto someone else. We're reacting to ourselves. We're making other people look like our hated aspects of ourselves. And then in projective identification, we're making them comply with the hated aspect of ourselves. And the other person, unless they have tremendous training in this and self-awareness, they won't know they're being manipulated to agree with it. And, we can extend this to politics if you want to, and society. Whole groups will use projective identification in a sense on other groups. Anyway, So going on, it reminds me of the famous allegory of the cave and how we aren't really free if we are habituated to seeing shadows are truths. So just chiming in, I actually looked up the allegory of the cave. I hadn't heard it before, but I wrote down what it is here. So imagine prisoners chained inside a dark cave since birth, and they are facing a blank wall. By the way, this sounds horrific, but anyway. So imagine prisoners chained inside a dark cave since birth, meaning that they've never seen the outside of the cave, and they are facing a blank wall, meaning that they've never seen anything other than the blank wall. They cannot turn their heads and can only see shadows cast on the wall by objects passing in front of the fire behind them. These shadows are the only reality they know. The prisoners perceive the shadows as the most real things in the world since they have never seen the actual objects. Our prisoner is freed to expose, one prisoner is freed and exposed to the outside world. Initially, he is blinded by the sunlight, but he gradually comes to see and understand the real objects. The freed prisoner returns to the cave to enlighten the others. However, they resist and ridicule him, preferring the familiar shadows over the blinding light. End of analogy. And yeah, it's one of those analogies that if you apply it to things that are within your perspective, then it makes sense. It's always the other person that doesn't know reality, is reacting to shadows. We're ourselves never the people that are reacting to shadows, when in fact all of us are chained looking at the wall, whether it has to do with societal aspects or aspects of our partners or ourselves, or even just aspects of the physical world. I mean, when I think about this as an amateur astronomer, physics person, the amount of radiation and light that is around us is a lot. As you can tell, I'm an amateur in this because I don't know the words for it. But anyway, the light spectrum is vast, and we only see a narrow band of light that we perceive as, all the colors of the rainbow. But there's a lot of light that is occurring that we can't see, whether it's all the, spectrum within the infrared and microwaves, and you got gamma rays and X-rays and ultraviolet and stuff, and all that is happening in the same way that the visible light is, but we don't see it. So it doesn't exist, We just are like, it's hard for us to imagine it being real, right? COVID is so small, it's just like, well, it just doesn't exist, right? It's just a conspiracy by the left or something, it's just all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling, but going on with your email. Do you think these concepts overlap? End of email. And Jocelyn always says end of email, which I like. Jocelyn, you're asking about the concept of the cave and projective identification. Yeah. It's not, it's tempting to see them as very similar because of the physical act of projection of a shadow onto a brick wall. But the shadow on the wall is not produced by the person themselves, right? The shadow is something that's happening in reality, independent of what the prisoner says or does or believes, right? The shadow is real, and the prisoner is looking at the shadow. Whereas projection as a psychodynamic defense is something that the self does themselves. So it'd be as if they were staring at their own shadow on the wall as they were sort of fidgeting around in their shackles and reacting, like say themselves, they sort of like fidget a little bit, and then the person looks at the wall and says, I think that person is trying to provoke me. I think they're trying to piss me off. And then the self, the prisoner, starts to get a little aggressive in his movements, and then he sees the shadow, and the shadow is making aggressive movements, and then the prisoner's like, hey, that guy is definitely being aggressive with me. Fuck that guy. Well, you're just reacting to yourself. You're the one that was paranoid and saw it when it wasn't there, because it wasn't. You just saw yourself fidgeting and interpreted it as aggression. So So you got aggressive, but you were only getting aggressive because you saw it as aggressive, and you're the aggressive one, and then the shadow is aggressive, and so then you got aggressive, and you're saying you're only aggressive because the shadow's being aggressive, but you are the fucking shadow. That's what projection is. That's what projective identification is. All right, let's take another break. All right, we're back from the break. Sorry for all the swearing, but I'm not sorry because it's my podcast, and fuck you. Fuck me. Fuck the whole fucking thing. For the record, I love the world and people, and I have tremendous hope, but there's a time for anger, and there's a time for love, and there's a time for solace, and there's a time for action, and there's a time for rage, and there's a time for cooling ourselves down. There's a time to forget, and there's a time to remember, and there's a time to have conversations. This is a time to listen, and right now is a time for rage. So middle tier patrons from the early part of 2022, we have Marta from Toronto, Ontario. We have Nadine from Pentling, Germany. We have Servatius from Sweden. We have Asa Engberg from Sweden. We have Lucy from Olympia, Washington. Go to Olympia. DT from San Diego, California. Andrea from South Beach, Oregon. Austin from Plano, Texas. Dork, meaning like psychology dork, from Clifton Heights, Pennsylvania. Jordan from Kearns, Utah. Sasha from Fairfax, Virginia. Philip from good old Seattle, Washington. Rebecca from Memphis, Tennessee. I've been to Memphis, and it was a lovely town. Holly from Oklahoma City, the town that took my beloved Sonics. Thank you very much, but thank you for being a military patron, Holly. We have Miranda from Nashville, Tennessee, which I've also been to, which I also liked, but not as much as Memphis. And then we also have at the mug level, we have Elspeth from Aurora, Colorado, and we have Zoe from God knows where. And we also have a highest tier person, someone that I've actually communicated with over email and also on the air answering his emails. We have Nils from Dubai, from the United Arab Emirates. Thank you so much for being middle tier and mug level and highest tier patron and being a patron through thick and thin all this time. I would not be able to pay my bills in the least if it weren't for patrons. No joke. So I would have to work at the university full time again, and I would have zero time to make a podcast, and particularly for the YouTube channel. All right, let's read another email here. All right, this is an interesting email from patron and YouTube member Emma. She says, I am an adult who was diagnosed with OCD about a year ago. I am currently taking medication, and I'm in therapy for it, and I am feeling much better than before I was diagnosed. Just chiming in here. Emma, I'm so glad that you have been getting medication and therapy because OCD is rough. So I'm glad that you have symptom relief. Going on, the reason I am emailing is to offer an unpopular perspective on an issue and ask your opinion. I grew up very progressive, so I had always heard that it wasn't okay to say I am so OCD because it can be offensive to people who actually have OCD. Just chiming in here. You say that you grew up very progressive. By implication, you're saying that progressives are the ones that say you're not supposed to say I'm so OCD. That's not my cultural pockets experience. I mean, maybe there's a little bit more of progressives are more likely, but progressives are also more likely to know what therapy is and to be in the psychological profession. So there's that, but I hadn't known that would be a particularly progressive thing. There are certain things that are kind of like that, but you are saying that you grew up hearing that it wasn't okay to say I'm so OCD. And to be clear, for people who don't know, like sometimes I'm talking to Bob and I realize that if you're not there's a bell curve of onlineness that people are, right? There's an average amount, but there's people like Bob who are basically never online and have no idea who Andrew Tate is or what a Love is Blind is or who all the people are. Anyway, I was going to say like Shapiro. So the trend for people, I think particularly younger people, is when they are being neat and tidy, is to say I'm so OCD, or to observe someone being neat and tidy and saying, oh my God, you're so OCD, or someone who's particular about something or who likes to be organized and say, oh my God, I'm so OCD. And that is not OCD. It's just being tidy or particular or clean or maybe a little anal retentive or something. It's not OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a debilitating condition that causes round-the-clock worry and concern about things that basically make no sense. There will be conditions of OCD that relate to praying, and one who suffers from this will have to pray to God literally every second that they are awake, or else something horrific will happen. And no matter how much you tell them that nothing bad will happen, they don't believe you. They know that something bad will happen if they don't pray constantly. That's not being tidy. That's not being particular. It's not even fucking close. It's a disorder. So when people say, oh my God, I'm so OCD, it's at the very least inaccurate and also annoying and potentially demeaning and spreads misinformation, but going on. The problem for me is that because I was overly sensitive to this, meaning overly sensitive to saying, not saying I'm so OCD, I didn't allow myself to even consider that I might actually have OCD. This led me to waiting way longer than I should have to get diagnosed and treated. I've thought about this a lot, and I think that in an effort to be sensitive to others, it actually causes us to be less comfortable talking openly about OCD symptoms. Just chiming in. That's interesting. I could see that happening. I had not thought of that before, but I could see someone like yourself, Emma, who legit has OCD, and there, especially if it was in the cleanliness realm, right? That you might think, oh, I maybe I have OCD. Oh my God, I'm so OCD. And you're not supposed to say that. So I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to explore it. And that's wrong. You're not supposed. So I guess it depends on what kind of lessons you're learning, right? If you learn just a blanket statement that any contemplation of OCD is wrong, then yeah, But I could also see someone who has emerging awareness and concern about the suffering of OCD and how they're being pathologically concerned with germs or cleanliness or organization. And they mistake the way that people will use it colloquially to just mean that they're just because the key to the difference between being organized or fastidious or tidy or preferring clean and OCD is that for the people that prefer things to be clean, if they're frustrated in their desire for things to be clean, they don't completely become pathological. It doesn't ruin their lives. When people with legit OCD are faced with a situation in which they can't control what they're trying to control, they will become unglued internally. They might not show it, but it will ruin their lives and require elaborate systems of coping. They might isolate themselves so they can control their environment, or they might have to run home after enduring the uncleanliness of the world and like take a shower or bathe in diluted bleach. Literally, that's what people will do. And so there's that's the difference, right? Like for me, I really don't like things being unorganized, and Stacy is the same way. Like when we have a party at our house, there's inevitably always a lot of things strewn about. And before we go to bed, typically the two of us will spend a couple hours just cleaning everything and organizing everything before we go to bed, or at the very least, first thing in the morning, And if we had to go to bed before doing that, like if we had to wake up in the morning or something like that, then it wouldn't bother us, There'd be a little like, I don't like that feeling, but it wouldn't interfere with our sleep, and we would be able to just, do that and not have it plague our mind, not be like the central focus of our brain as we walk away from that activity. Whereas people with OCD, that's what it will feel like. It's debilitating. Anyway, but, I could see someone who has been absorbing that backlash against saying I'm so OCD and not allowing themselves to contemplate that they have OCD. And I guess the argument is that maybe when the general public just uses the term, it raises awareness of the term, which means that those who have the term are more likely to seek out the term. Yeah, and I don't know. I guess we'd have to do some research on it to find the relative benefit or problem, because there is a downside to people misunderstanding the term, because then you have people with legit OCD who hear people using OCD in this other way, and they say, "Well, I don't have that. I'm not tidy. I have this like praying 24/7 thing. That's not OCD. I don't know what this is. There's something wrong with me," right? So there's that. Also, people who have OCD, it's stigmatizing to them, because when people are saying, "Oh my God, I'm so OCD, like I can't stand it when things are out of place," they're not talking about something that's pleasant or good about themselves typically. They're kind of laughing at themselves, and it is stigmatizing to those people who have it 100 times worse, right? If someone was suffering from the disorder and they heard people calling themselves OCD and sort of making a joke about it because they're just, mildly tidy, then they're like, my God, if they knew how pathologically tidy I am, then they would be really concerned about it. And also just there are people that will say, when I have legit OCD that's daily and I struggle and suffer from it all the time and it ruins my life, and I see people on TikTok making jokes about how they have OCD, it completely strips me of the the validation. It just makes me feel like shit, that people at the very least they don't even care to know what real OCD is. It'd be similar if someone were to say something like, it's not maybe this bad, but it's in the direction of saying like, "Oh my God, like I've been stuck at work for 12 hours and I can't leave because the boss really wants us to finish by this deadline. It's like we're in Auschwitz." Okay, like it's not the end of the world to say that, but it could really hurt someone's feelings, right? So it's not that, I would imagine it's not that bad, but it can feel that way, right? So Emma, I don't know what you're advocating for. I don't know if you're saying, hey, we should stop pushing back on people that are using this term erroneously. I don't know if that's what you're saying. Really what you're saying overall is you had OCD for longer than you were suffering longer than would have been otherwise if you were made aware of OCD. And maybe one of the factors is that you were being taught to never say I have OCD, and therefore you weren't allowed to explore it. I imagine that's kind of particular to you and maybe others as well. But the umbrella thing here is we need to raise awareness about OCD so that it doesn't matter if people are bastardizing it. If everyone understood because they learned in school, which I know some schools are teaching this, but not enough, then you would have people that would go, oh, wow, that's me, actually. I know that people use that term flippantly, but when I learn about the disorder, I actually think I have the disorder. Anyway, going on here in the email. Personally, I welcome people making jokes about being OCD because it could be them getting close to realizing that they have a problem. Even if they don't, what's the real downside? What's the problem with talking about OCD in everyday conversation or making jokes? I feel like I shouldn't have to hide it or make it a taboo thing. I find comfort speaking openly about it, but I've even had people who don't know that I actually have OCD tell me I'm being offensive to people with OCD. Well, that's a problem. You're telling me that you have legit OCD, that you've been diagnosed, you've been getting treatment for it. You say you have OCD to people, and then they say you're being offensive to people with actual OCD. I mean, that is some fucking bullshit right there. And those people are dumb. I'm sorry. Like, that anybody saying that. So that's the problem right there, Emma, is you have people in your life who believe that anyone who says they have OCD is being offensive, even when they actually have OCD. Yeah, that is, that would really, so for you, Emma, that doesn't feel good, right? So when you say I have OCD, and you have OCD, and someone says, no, you don't, and that's offensive to say that bothers you, right? That is taking away your experience. It is denying your suffering. Well, when another person has legit OCD, and another person says, oh my God, I'm so OCD, I'm so tidy, that's another way of it's all bad, it's all unfair. And it's so easy to fix. Just one, stop saying you have OCD when you don't have it, when you're just being tidy. Two, let's raise awareness about OCD so all the problems are lesser. You have fewer people that suffer longer than they need to. You have fewer people stripping you of your OCD because they're just uncomfortable, or they have this dogmatic understanding of the problematic nature of the statement of I'm so OCD. This kind of thinking, I don't know, it's frustrating because it's sort of like when you are asking people, okay, let's say that your spouse is got injured and is about to bleed out, and you're driving them to the hospital, and you come up to a stoplight and it's red and it's a flat road and you can see left and right, it's daylight and there are no cars coming. Is it okay to run the red light? You will find some people say, no, you can't run the red light. It's wrong. And it's like, it's okay to run the red light. You should be running the red light. If you don't see any cars coming, run the fucking red light. So this idea of people learning a guideline and then making it dogma, it's a guideline to not say I'm so OCD. It's not wrong to say I have OCD. It's just a suggestion of empathy that some people might be hurt, and it's inaccurate, and there are other words. And you're making a joke about something because you think it's funny that you have OCD. It's not funny. OCD is not funny. Now, if someone has OCD and they want to make a joke about it, as you do, Emma, because it's fine. You could be like, well, that's me and my OCD again. That's great. But for another person who doesn't even know what OCD is really, to make a joke about it, in the same way of someone just be like, oh my God, I'm so hungry. I'm like a prisoner in Auschwitz right now. No. Now, if a former prisoner of Auschwitz wanted to make a joke in their overall life about their experience in Auschwitz, it depends, but it's a different context. I'm not the first person to talk about this, but the whole idea of just people hearing things on TikTok and then just following it as like some sort of rule, but given to us by God or something, without understanding why we are saying what we're saying. I've never said you can't say I'm so OCD. I'm saying here's the situation. There's people with OCD, and here's what OCD is, by the way, and that does not sound pleasant, right? It sounds horrific, and it is not just being tidy, and you can just say tidy, or I'm fastidious, or And you can make a joke about it too. You can even just say, oh my God, I am so tighty. I'm so anal. Like, anal retentive is a technical term, but no one walks around saying, I'm anal retentive, and if other people make jokes about it, that's going to upset me. I've never heard that before. So that's a clinical term, I guess, from over 100 years ago that is outdated, that some people still use, but not many. But you can, just use that. Just say, oh my God, I'm so anal retentive, or I'm so anal, or, oh, I'm so annoyingly organized. I just need things to be organized. You can still make fun of yourself. Just leave OCD out of your mouth. Anyway, going on. Anyway, I just wanted to offer my perspective and ask your opinion about it. I am a new fan and have really been finding value in your content, so thank you very much. Well, I hope you're still a fan, even though I'm kind of pushing back on what you're saying. I'm not pushing back on your experience, and I'm not saying that I disagree with you and your individual experience, and I'll say that your email has introduced a brand new idea to me in terms of the discourse, and that's what wisdom is hearing all the angles and incorporating them. And so I am incorporating, and I will incorporate. Like, the next time that I think or talk about this concept, I will hopefully remember this email and have an asterisk to the whole thing. But I still hold that what I just said, and I absolutely value what you're saying here. But I think the frustration that you have, Emma, is that you had OCD longer. You were suffering from OCD longer than you would have otherwise, or at least you think you were suffering from it longer than you would have otherwise because of what you're calling the progressive pushback, which also just is, anyway, point is that's what you're saying. And that could be true in your circle, but the answer to me isn't that we stop pushing back on people bastardizing the term. The answer is that we just raise awareness about OCD, which would naturally cause people to stop using it as a joke. If we just help people understand what OCD really is. And the media doesn't help. Like, the popular depictions of OCD, none of them depict it well enough to be reflective of what it's actually like to have OCD. Like that As Good as It Gets, I think, with Jack Nicholson, or the TV show Monk. I mean, they're raising awareness, and there are aspects of it that are close to accurate, or at least a version of OCD, but they do not. These are comedies, and they have plots that wrap up well in the end, and everyone's happy in the end. OCD is horrible. It is horrible. It's one of the worst things you could ever have in the DSM. It truly is. It is the worst, especially if it's moderate to severe. It is horrible, and it is difficult, even with the best treatment, to completely eradicate. It can last forever, and it's just a matter of monitoring it. John Green, the author of Anthropocene Reviewed and the podcaster, and the author of The Fault in My Stars and Something All the Way Down, talks a bit about his OCD. And when he talks about it, you hear it. You hear how bad it is, how much it plagues him on a second by second basis. And he has the means and the power to get treatment, and he does engage in treatment, and yet he still suffers. It's hard. It's terrifying. It's consuming. It's life ruining. You can't live with it and live a good life and be happy, but it's not something to just be light about or to joke about and to write a funny plot around in a movie or a TV show. That's to me, that's not okay. And I'm not saying that Monk shouldn't exist or that it should never be in a movie, but I guess maybe this is what I'll say, is that if we had a rational wise, intelligent, sophisticated public health system that used tax dollars to educate everyone, and a public education system that adequately educated everybody about these things, then that would fix it. But we don't. So we rely on TikTok and on cultural talk about mental disorders, like what a narcissist is, to educate people and budding clinicians about this kind of stuff. Well, that's not going to work, and it hasn't worked. It'll never work. It's making it worse. And there you have it. And so what we're left with is trying to nitpick about whether or not you can joke about this sort of thing. But really the bigger problem is that as a society, we pay taxes and we don't even think that we can say, hey, could you spend a little bit of that money on this so that us, the people, benefit from our tax dollars in this way? And I know that some tax dollars are spent this way, but not nearly enough. Not nearly enough. Or they're spent in really odd ways. Anyway. So, full disclosure, it's still Wednesday, November 6th. The last email episode on Monday was also on that day, and I'm still in that headspace. So if I have a particular bent, it's because of that. And I don't apologize for it. It is what it is, and that's where I am, and I won't always be here, but I am here now, and I am okay with that. And if you're not okay with that, that's okay too. But that's where I'm at. And let's end with something a little lighter. All right, this email from anonymous patron. She says, "Hi, Dr. Honda. On Thursday live stream, you mentioned you had a therapist for 5 sessions, then you realized it wasn't a good fit. What made you feel that way?" End of email. Well, I was looking for a therapist who would take my insurance, which would make it a lot less expensive, and it'd like a $20 copay instead of paying $200 or $150 or something at the time. And I was given a list of therapists that were covered by my insurance in my area. And I kind of shopped around, and then I picked this guy, and I made an appointment, and it sounded like it might be a good fit. He was older than me and had a very warm voice. And then when I went to his office was like this like meditative oasis. The lights were dim, and I think he even had like one of those meditation bowls that had a timer on it or something, and when the session was almost over, it would go like ding. It was like this really reminder. And it was this little office and cozy, and we each had our own plushy love seats that we, like recliners that we would sit in, and there were big pillows, and there were probably blankets, and I would talk to him, and he would nod and listen, and it felt good, but there was something off, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. I kept going back, and I started wondering if he understood anything. He had all the motions of a good listener, but in the 5th session, I started, and I thought that it would work out. Going into the 5th session, I remember thinking that, well, I think I just need to tell him that I want him to talk more or something. And I kind of probed him a little bit of just like, so, I can't remember what I said, but it would have been something like, so what do you think about what I've been saying today? Or do you have any experience like this? And he wasn't the sort of psychoanalytic oriented therapist where he doesn't answer questions. He would answer the questions the way a humanistic therapist would. And he did. And the way he answered made me feel like he didn't understand anything I was talking about ever. Like, I don't know if we were just on different planets, or if he was too stoned or something, or I'm too sensitive to that, or I don't explain things well, or it was a bad day. I don't know, but it was a growing feeling that I had that he didn't really comprehend for whatever reason. And if I was, and I don't think I've ever thought about why that was. I at the time, I think I just attributed it to, we're just on different wavelengths. We're just too different of a people that it's too hard for him to understand like my perspective or something, and that's happened before, right after that, I found another therapist and liked her, and we were very much on a similar wavelength, but there were times when we weren't. I remember this one time with her, I mentioned that I had death anxiety or I don't know if I said death anxiety, but I talked about, I've talked about it before. And the therapist, she said, "Oh yeah, well, death anxiety, it can be hard for some people." And I don't know, I can't remember what she said, but it was a way that people will talk that, sort of, it's like they're talking about a phobia of spiders or something, They're just like, "Oh yeah, some people have a phobia of spiders, and it's a quaint little sliver of experience, and we can eradicate it if we work on it." She wasn't saying that, but it was something along those lines. Because to me, when I say death anxiety, it's just the best phrase for it, but it's not really anxiety about death. I'm not worried about death. What I am is I am grieving the reality that we all are snapped into non-existence at some point. Me and everyone I love, and every pet I've ever had, and every pet I will ever have, everyone I will meet will be nothing. They won't even be in an abyss, because there will be nothing of them to be inside of something, and there will be no abyss, because the abyss implies that there's something to go into. It's just blinked out of existence. Now, there's a possibility that there is an afterlife, and I hold that. I certainly hope that there is, and if there is, I will be celebrating, as long as it's a good afterlife, right? And there's that, but there's a pretty good chance that there isn't, or at least let's just say there's a chance that there isn't. Even if you just think there's a 5%, I would say the average Christian, dedicated believer, believes that, well, I don't know, that maybe afterlife doesn't exist. I'm going on faith. So the fact that there's this chance that there is no afterlife and we just blink out of existence is horrible. I don't like that. I don't like that everyone I love will go there, and I don't like that I'm going to go there. Even that phrasing doesn't make any sense. I'm not going anywhere, and there is no there. It's even just hard to comprehend, But it's not death anxiety. It's non-existence disappointment. It's existential grief. It sucks, and time marches on, and ever faster the older I get, and it fucking sucks. I'm not, it sucks. And some of you are listening right now after I've already died, because this will live on the internet, and you'll be like, "Wow, well, maybe he's in an afterlife right now, or maybe he's, maybe he's just gone," and it angers me, it disappoints me, it saddens me, it demoralizes me. It doesn't plague me. The more that I think about it and talk about it and hear other people talking about it, I've gotten to a place where I can accept it and feel my feelings when it comes up, but also not let it sort of ride my back like a monkey. What's the idiom? It's not a monkey on my back. It's not something that it doesn't get in the way, but it doesn't go away. So when I was, sort of alluding to that, I didn't go into detail about it, but when my therapist said, "Oh, yeah, death anxiety, we could probably work on that," or I can't remember what she said, but I was just like, "Oh, you don't understand what I'm saying, and you're really trivializing something that I consider to be inherent to life, unless you believe in an afterlife, right? But a lot of people at least hold that there might not be. So, there was a moment when I felt like she wasn't really listening. She also fell asleep on me in session, but I don't blame her because I'm a talker. And also she was like in her third trimester. And so I was just proud that she showed up for the session, given what she was going through physically. But yeah, she wasn't perfect. She moved to an office that was, I thought, to be unethical because the door between her office and the waiting room was so thin, and there was like an inch gap between the door and the floor that when you were in the waiting room, you could hear everything that was being said in the session. I would arrive early and I would hear, because she was originally in one building where that wasn't the case, and then she moved to another building. I don't know why, but maybe as a step up or something. And this waiting room situation was horrible. And she was on a street where every 3 minutes a really loud truck would drive by and rattle the whole office and the windows and everything. It was really disruptive, and so that wasn't great either. But she was great. She listened well. She understood me. She challenged me. She was validating. She was smart. She was professional. She showed up, and she was curative to me. I still think about her when I think about certain things in my life. We'll go into it. Point is that your question, anonymous patron, is why didn't I like that therapist for 5 sessions? That's why. And this highlights that. And this is what I tell people is, you got to shop around, and you got to remember that each therapist that you decide to work with, they're on probation for 5 to 10 sessions. You might feel, because I did after the first couple sessions, I'm like, this guy's great, But after a while, I'm like, no, he's not. He doesn't understand any fucking thing I'm saying. It takes a while, and it sucks. But if you keep at it, and you put up with an inch gap below the door sometimes, and I should have said something, I didn't. And that's always kind of weird too, because I was, as a colleague, senior to her. I think I might have been older at the time, and I'm an established clinician in Seattle. I'm a professor. I might have even been program director at that point. I probably was at least close to that. And it's weird for me to tell someone, I think you need to deal with this door situation. Like I feel like I'm overstepping or something, I should say something because that was pretty egregious, and she would benefit by someone. I mean, at the very least, just put a towel, they have those like things you can sort of tape to the bottom of the door that will at least help a little bit. I don't know. But I didn't care, because the kind of shit I was talking about, I didn't care if people heard me saying it. It's like, what, they don't know who I am. And if they did, it doesn't really matter. I don't know if I'd feel that way today, though, given that I'm like on YouTube and stuff. Anyway, that's me answering that question. I will say it's a lovely day in Seattle today. Sunny and warm and inviting to the outside. That's why Stacy's out there raking the leaves and she's talking on the phone, watching the dogs run around and bark and pee and poop. We're all in this together. And everyone, please take care of yourself. Please, truly, because you deserve it. You really, really do.